Hey YouTube, number one not fan of Les Pauls here, doing a video on a vintage Les Paul. Yeah, so as I said at the very start, I don't like Les Pauls very much. Probably just more because of what they look like. I think it all goes back to some guy that wasn't even in my year at school. But I remember him having I assume it was an Epiphone Les Paul, you know, the slash one, and he was hanging it at his knees, and the guy just seemed like a knob. Maybe that's why I've never really, never been much of a Les Paul fan. Yeah, so this is a vintage set neck. So I'd say, what do you call it? Like a Les Paul standard. So it's probably quite similar to the Epiphone. That's probably round about, maybe a little bit more expensive, but probably pretty much the same guitar. Wilkinson hardware, Wilkinson pickups. Are the tuners Wilkinson? Wilkinson Deluxe. The tuners are Wilkinson as well. It's these what they called Clausen Deluxe looking tuners. These ones. You've got your sort of quite Gibson-y headstock. This one does have a serial number on it. John Horby Scooters I-13. So Indonesia 2013. Something like that. I think I remember my pal Aaron was talking about these before, and I think this one's got a slightly pointier lower horn bit here to make it not quite Les Paul-y, although I might be imagining that. There's definitely something to do with up to a certain point the vintage Les Pauls were more Les Paul-y looking, and then they changed this horn. Whether this is the one that's been changed or one before it's changed, I can't really tell. I don't really know. Looking at it, you know, if you took a wing off the wall and changed it a bit dimensionally, I would notice immediately because I'm used to looking at them. I'm not really that used to looking at Les Pauls, so I think this might be a little bit pointier than it is on a Gibson or an Epiphone, but I'm not really sure. So I had this in basically just for a setup and some fret divots, you know, on the cowboy chords, which you often get, and probably means the guitar's been played well, but it probably also means that the guitar's been played by a beginner who, like we all did, or I did anyway, when you're playing a chord at the start, you hold those strings down as hard as you can to make them sound. So you're and when then a couple of months later, once you start getting a much stronger hand, you're still holding it in as hard as you can, which wears out the frets. Also, I was just thinking there when I was doing it, vibrato. So if you're a beginner, you don't tend to vibrato, you know, you just play a note. Whereas if I play that note, I'd play that one, which you're moving it about, which maybe would stop the divot happening quite the same way, because whenever I've got enough time to play a note, it's got a bit of a wobble to it. Very rarely do I ever hit a note that just rings on its own. You know, it's like, or whatever's more fun for you. Yeah, so I was just basically sorting out some of the frets and setting up. Bit of truss rods, you know, usual stuff, intonation. The guy was wondering if I could maybe put in coil splits or a phase switch, and yes I can, but see, these particular Wilkinson pickups, these have metal covers on them, and they've only got 2 wires coming out of them, which means to get into add the extra wires for either phase, because you need to disconnect for phase, because what you're doing is you're swapping the pickup round backwards. One of the wires is connected to the cover, so that if you just reverse the phase of it, it means that when you accidentally touch the cover, what it's like, it basically makes that noise, because that's what you've got. It's, you know, it makes the cover hot or live. So you have to angle grind the cover off, because covers are always held on with solder that doesn't melt with a normal soldering iron. I don't know what they use, it's plumbing solder, or they just use a special very hot soldering iron to melt up. So you have to cut that off, go in, peel off all the winding off the pickup, get at the wires. For the phase one, you have to take the wire off the base plate or off the cover and add another wire for your earth, so you can use the 2 wires for the start and the finish of the coil without making the cover live when you put a phase in. And the same thing for making it coil split. You have to take the cover off, get inside it, find the wire that joins the 2 coils together, solder an extra wire onto that, and that's your coil split wire. So basically I didn't do that. I think with a Les Paul, you've got 2 volumes and two tones, so you get quite a lot of tones you can mess about with. I'm not really guilty of doing that very often at all, even though, you know, a lot of these guitars do have the 2 volumes and 2 tones. I tend to not. I don't think I'm not subtle enough to fully work in. I do appreciate when you've got them both on. When you've got them both on, turning one of them down a wee bit does give you interesting sounds. There's a knob there. So you end up with quite a lot of variance adjusting the volume of one of them. So playing through wee Laney VC15, it's coming through that cabinet, no pedals on. Bridge. Neck. Both of them on at full volume. Should probably play something Les Paul, eh? I'm going to put some distortion on my stack in the box. I was in a couple of weeks ago jamming with a Led Zeppelin band. I must be able to play. Must be able to remember some Led Zeppelin. You would have thought. Eh? There's that woman tone where you turn the tone control completely down. So what I'm going to do is I'm in the studio this afternoon, so I'm going to stick in a wee bit behind a solo that I should be learning a solo for, that every time I do it I just completely wing it. It's completely different. So that should be interesting. the rat pedal. Start with that note. Look at that. That's the kind of sound, if you buy a Les Paul, that's what you want, really, isn't it? You want on the neck and in the bridge. So again, I can't really fault vintage guitars. Vintage the brand, that is. They seem to be awesome, really, for what you get, especially when you start getting named hardware. I had an SG a while ago. I did a comparison between the SG and the Gibson SG, which I do have, and my old Epiphone SG, and it came out really well. Sort of somewhere between the two, I would have said. I imagine this is probably a similar sort of thing. I think it's never going to be as desirable as the Epiphone one, which I think are probably around about the same sort of price. So what they had to do was make it better than the Epiphone one. Even though I don't think vintage is a funny one. Vintage it's a really annoying name. I always say this about these guitars. When you type in vintage guitar into eBay, up comes millions of guitars from the 50s and 60s because they are vintage guitars. So they should just, if only they'd spelt it differently, or there was some way of distinguishing it a bit better. Because you can say, oh, I've got a vintage guitar at home, and you think, well, does that mean one of these? Does that mean it's like from the 80s or the 70s or the 60s? Or it's like, no, it means it's made by vintage, which makes it difficult to find them. But the hardware on them is awesome. I mean, I've used I buy Wilkinson hardware myself sometimes for things, just because you can get like a decent set of replacement tuners, which are miles better than what's on my Epiphone anyway. Mine's an old Samick one. Miles better than that, and they're not expensive. They're, I don't know, 25 quid, something like that. They're not. They just want decent replacements that are good, and I think that kind of goes the same with all of them. The pickups as well. I've had a few Wilkinson pickups kicking about. I was a wee bit surprised these ones didn't have the coil split wires in them, but I suppose you can probably save a couple of quid building it by not putting extra wires in, and that would go into keeping the price of the guitar overall down. I'd imagine these pickups are probably the same as the ones you buy, straight from when you buy separate pickups, but you'll get a 4-wire option or a 3-wire option. The looks put me off. This is kind of going back to that Dean ML I had, the camouflage one, where the guitar's brilliant. I mean, it's fine, it's great. I'd have no problem gigging it. I just don't want to be seen playing a black Les Paul. Same as the Dean ML, I don't want to be seen playing that, regardless of how good it is. So you're not going to have any issues with it not being a good guitar. Totally solid. The neck on it, I would say, is a very similar dimension to my Gibson SG Special. That's a 90s one. I don't really know what that would come in as. Would it be like a C shape? Maybe quite wide, but quite thin that way. It just seems about right. One thing I did notice playing this, which is something I have not really noticed very much at all, it's maybe because I've been playing the wings. I can feel the heel. When you're up at the sort of 12th fret, or okay, I'm playing the 14th fret there, actually the heel is actually where my hand is. I think that's just a Les Paul thing. When I'm saying it, I don't get that on the wings, they look like that. There ain't no heel in that. So it's one of those things that you don't really notice it. When you take away the heel, you don't notice that there's no heel, but when you go back to a guitar that's sort of similar weight and dimensions, and then suddenly there's heel, you do feel it. But it's like where the trade-off is anyway, assuming you've still got a set neck rather than a through neck. The way they get away with that's making it a through neck. So you really want the most wood contact from the neck to the body, so there's probably some chart that you could make up that would be, you keep scooping this away and scooping it away, and the quality of the tone of the guitar probably goes down as you make it smaller. So I would rather have chunky, and you just get used to it. Also, if you're playing up above maybe the 12, I think, is it maybe normally a wee bit higher than that? I don't know. I mean, the fret axis is fine. It's just obviously I'm having to go round the heel doing it that way. I don't like this one as much as I liked the yellow one, which the same guy had. I might have actually done a trade for this. The TV yellow one, flat top B90s. I like that more than this because this is just it's a standard Les Paul, but this is what everyone thinks of when you say Les Paul, and I'm just not a fan of the look. I want to be different, play something that's not a Les Paul. But as I always say, it's like it costs more to buy a Les Paul, and you can sell it for more. So there you go. There obviously something like this is never really going to go out of fashion, and it totally covers all the bases. This is one where you can, it's the correct guitar for Led Zeppelin and Guns N' Roses, but it's also acceptable for the Stones and the Beatles and the Who and all that lot. I think that all of them actually at one point did play Les Paul, so it's kind of, and then you get your sort of more Metallica-y type thing where it's not miles away from that either. So they're quite a versatile, probably more for looks rather than actual ability, because all kind of guitars you can play anything on anything. It's just, are you going to look like a bit of a ninny standing on stage, playing a pink spiky BC Rich bitch when you're playing Beach Boys songs? Yes, you are going to look a bit silly. It's going to sound fine. And the other way goes round, if it's up here, yeah, I've got my Jazzcaster, with a big tremolo and stuff like that for the surf sound, and we're playing Metallica, which it will still do it, but it just doesn't look right. Whereas this kind of, you could cover both, all bases pretty much. I don't think there's really a band that you couldn't play a Les Paul in. But fit and finish in this guitar, fantastic. I can't really compare it to an Epiphone one because I think the last Epiphone one I played, it wasn't that long ago. Epiphone changed though. It depends on whether you've got like a 90s one or a 2000s one or a 2010s one, because it's like, okay, it's still an Epiphone Les Paul standard and it still says Epiphone in the headstock, but everything else has changed. Different country, all different parts, different woods, everything depending on which year it is you go by. I don't know if vintage are quite, I think they do change a little bit, but I don't think they change quite as much as Epiphone did. You can get wildly different Epiphones, even though they're both just an SG standard. It's like there's nothing like that. You know, it's like it doesn't feel in like every single part, and it's completely different. It's made in a different country. So there we go. So that wee short video turned out to be 20 minutes long. I didn't think it really talked that much rubbish during it. But yes, if it came down to it, it's like, would you recommend buying a vintage Les Paul? And it's like, if you like Les Pauls, yes, I probably would. I mean, it's not just this Les Paul I don't particularly like. I've worked on a few, like, you know, Les Paul standards at, you know, 1,500 quid and stuff like that. I probably like them even less, and that's probably because I know they cost 1,500 quid, and it's like not worth 1,500 quid. No guitar, well, not any guitar I've come across I felt has been worth 1,500 quid when you're comparing it against some of the ones I've got that didn't cost anything like that. You do have the brand value in it though. That's where it comes in. I've got a Gibson Les Paul standard. It costs £2,500. It is a Gibson Les Paul standard. That can't be argued. Doesn't matter how good it is. It doesn't. They don't compare to these. Pretty much by any measure, apart from the fact that that's not a Gibson Les Paul standard. That's a copy. Not really. It's an improvement on it. But not worth anything like as much. Not worth £2,500. They will be one day though, and I'll have my wall. That wall will be worth a car. One day, maybe, probably, hopefully.